Introvert or autistic? That is the question. Will both involve needing alone time and being overwhelmed in social situations, but there are actually some big differences. So let's get into that today. Let's start off by doing a quick definition of both. With introverts, they can recharge with some alone time. They can be social, but too much interaction can drain them. For autistic people like myself, there are other things that come into play when we talk about social interactions. There are things that affect us like communication and sensory processing. So for autistic people, it's not about liking or disliking people, but how we process the world around us. Now let's go through the difference between social energy versus social processing. So for introverts, socializing can be tiring, but they can still navigate conversations naturally when they do actually engage with people. On the other hand, for an autistic person, socializing can not only be tiring, but it can be stressful, it can be confusing, and it can be really overwhelming. Now let's talk about the differences when it comes to small talk. Although introverts may not love small talk, they still can manage to do it when needed. Now let's talk about small talk when it comes to autistic people. Small talk can still feel overwhelming, and often autistic people like myself have a script already in mind when it comes to small talk. So when you go to the cafe and the barista says, "Hi, how are you today?" you've got your response already planned, which is great. It can actually reduce the stress, but also the stress can increase when the topic goes off script. And so for an introvert, I guess, if they were talking to a barista, they could have their conversation, go back to reading their book and not really think about it for the rest of the day. But for an autistic person, that small interaction can still leave us feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Did we say the right thing? Should we have said more? It can still be confusing. So let's talk about sensory sensitivities. So for an introvert, being out in a loud, noisy place might leave them feeling drained, but not necessarily overwhelmed. For an autistic person in that same situation, not only are you dealing with the social interaction side of things, but you've got other things that feel like your central nervous system is being attacked. You've got the bright lights, there might be bass from the music, you may have been sitting in the same chair for an hour and the texture of the seat has been irritating your skin, and you just go into sensory overload. So for you, getting home from that event probably seems like it's going to be life-saving as compared to an introvert who might just feel like they're done and they just need to get home and recharge. For the autistic person, the need to get home and de-stress and get away from all that sensory input that is making things quite unpleasant and quite difficult is really what's needed. So for an autistic person, routine can actually really help with stress management and predictability and knowing what's going to be happening next. So sometimes the change in the routine can be overwhelming and distressing. For example, if an introvert and an autistic person are planning a weekend together, if the plans suddenly change, the introvert is probably going to roll with it and not be too bothered about the change. But for the autistic person, that can actually be overwhelming and distressing because not only have they planned for this getaway, maybe packing their clothes and getting their medications organized and everything, but it's also preparing your brain for that trip and what might be happening. So once those plans change, the unpredictability really can become quite overwhelming. So the next point we're going to talk about is body language and social cues. So an introvert can understand social cues, but prefer to have low-key interactions. For the autistic person, they might have trouble reading facial expressions, tone of voice, or even those unspoken social rules. So an example here is, just say you're having a conversation with someone. The introvert will know when to politely finish the conversation, but for the autistic person, they might not realize it's time to wrap things up and end up oversharing and keeping a conversation going that is well and truly over. The question now is, can you be an introvert and also be autistic? Well, the answer is yes, you can. There are a lot of autistic people who are also introverts. There are also some autistic people that are extroverts. They love being around people, but they still struggle with sensory overload and social norms. So how can you tell the difference? Well, if you related to some of the autistic traits that I mentioned in the video and you've had those since childhood, it might be something that's worth looking into. But whether you're an introvert, autistic, or maybe even both, the most important thing is understanding your needs and what makes you feel comfortable. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'm hoping to make this a safe space for autistic people to share their experiences. Let's chat in the comments, and thanks for watching.